Star Trek The Original Series, Season 1, Episode 15, Shore Leave. Feels like it's been a while since I talked about a Star Trek episode that I actually like, so I figured it was time to pick a good one. And Shore Leave is a fun episode in my opinion. It's very strange, but it's pretty enjoyable. It's not very deep, and by the end of it, you might wonder what the point of it was, but to me, it has a handful of iconic Star Trek moments, including what I think is one of the most well-choreographed fight scenes in Star Trek, which I know is not necessarily saying much, but it's a good one. It also has a giant rabbit, and who doesn't love that? And before we get started, I have a little bit of an ad break, sort of. My friend Neo, aka Speculating Nerd on Twitter, is a graphic design artist. He makes all kinds of fun t-shirts, and you can find him on TeePublic under Multiversal Graphic and Artworks. Check him out, because he also has some Eddie Steak merchandise. So have a look at that if you're interested, and thanks again, Neo, for the support. Anyway, I think we should just get started. The episode opens up with the Enterprise in orbit above a planet. The crew is in need of rest, and they are scouting the planet as a possible shore leave destination. And Kirk has some sudden back pain, and Yeoman Barrows starts pushing on it, which I think is very bold of her. That's not exactly in the job description, but Kirk doesn't know that it's Barrows. He thinks it's Spock that's massaging his back. And it's kind of funny that he was okay with Spock doing it, but he's uncomfortable once he finds out that it was Barrows. And I think that says something about Captain Kirk. And no, it's not necessarily what you're thinking. I think it just says that he's okay with his friends helping him out, but he doesn't want to abuse his power with his subordinates, if that makes sense. Basically, he doesn't want his crew to do anything more for him than their duty. And Spock says the entire crew is in need of rest, except for him, of course. And McCoy and Sulu are down on the surface observing the planet. And there are no other people here, no animals, and no insects, which seems unlikely, especially concerning the insects. I mean, there's plant life on this planet. Can that happen without insects? I don't think so. That really should have been their first indication that this is an artificial environment. Spoiler alert. Anyway, McCoy tells Sulu that this place is like something out of Alice in Wonderland. He also says it's the perfect place for the captain to take a rest. He says he needs it. He says, you've got your problems and I've got mine, but the captain has ours, plus his, plus 430 other people. And I kind of like that. I like that the implication is that the well-being of the crew is the captain's personal responsibility. But obviously, it's taking a toll, because everyone agrees that Kirk needs to stop and smell the roses. And Sulu and McCoy separate for a second, and McCoy suddenly sees a giant white rabbit hopping through the woods. And he says he's late, and he's followed by a little blonde girl. And McCoy is stunned. He calls for Sulu. I like how he almost angrily calls for Sulu. It's very on brand for McCoy. You know, he's like, Sulu, get over here. I'm losing my damn mind. So naturally, he mentioned Alice in Wonderland, and he just saw the white rabbit from Alice in Wonderland and Alice herself. So that's a little concerning. So McCoy kind of reluctantly calls Kirk to report what he just saw, and Kirk just laughs it off. He thinks McCoy is just trying to trick him into taking shore leave, which he does not intend to do. But fortunately, Spock has another strategy.
McCoy's log. We have a crew member aboard who's showing signs of stress and fatigue. Reaction time down 9 to 12%. Associational rating norm -3.
That's much too low a rating.
He's becoming irritable and quarrelsome, yet he refuses to take rest and rehabilitation. Now, he has that right, but we found...
Crewman's right ends where the safety of the ship begins. Now, that man will go ashore on my orders. What's his name?
James Kirk.
Such a great Spock moment. He uses logic against Kirk, and it works. So, Kirk and Yeoman Barrows beam down, and they meet with Lieutenant Esteban Rodriguez and Lieutenant Angela Martin, And you might recognize Martine from the previous episode, Balance of Terror. Her fiancé gets killed in that one. Tragic. But she seems to have gotten over it. So that's nice. And they meet with McCoy, who has found some rabbit tracks. And he wonders if he's hallucinating. You know, I don't think McCoy gets enough credit for how intelligent he really is. I think it's actually a sign of intelligence to be able to question your own senses. And he's seeking a rational explanation, even if the rational explanation is that he's losing his damn mind. And I like that a lot. And fortunately, he's not losing his mind, because Kirk and Barrows see the rabbit tracks too. So Kirk calls the Enterprise and tells them to halt the shore leave until they find out what's going on here. Smart move. And they hear some gunshots, and they run to find out what it is, and they find Sulu. He has apparently found an old revolver just sitting on this planet somewhere, and he doesn't even question why it's here. He just starts recklessly firing it, and he says he hasn't got anything like this in his collection. So Sulu collects old firearms, apparently. So Kirk starts walking with McCoy, and he talks about his days at the academy, and he mentions an old bully named Finnegan. He says he was the type of guy to put a bowl of cold soup in your bed or a bucket of water propped up on a half-open door. A prankster, basically. And there's a strange antenna that seems to be observing them. They don't notice it, though. But they do notice some more rabbit tracks along with Alice's footprints. So they decide to split up. McCoy follows the rabbit and Kirk follows Alice. And suddenly, Finnegan shows up. Seems impossible. He was just talking about him. And Finnegan is just kind of this over-the-top Irish weirdo. And he greets Kirk with a punch to the face, laughing as he does it. It seems like Kirk would love the idea of beating the hell out of this dude. But he hears Barrows screaming in the distance, so he runs towards her. He meets up with McCoy, and they discover that Barrows was attacked. She says it was a man wearing a cloak, and he had a dagger with jewels on it. And McCoy says it sounds like Don Juan. And Barrows says yes. Just before she was attacked, she thought, all a girl really needs is Don Juan. It's odd that she would just randomly be fantasizing about Don Juan, who is like, this legendary womanizer. And at least in this instance, it seems like he's a lot worse than a womanizer because he attacked her and ripped part of her uniform. So there's strange goings-on, to say the least. And Kirk goes looking for Sulu, who went after Don Juan, and he comes across a flower which reminds him of something, or someone. And suddenly he sees a woman, and Kirk recognizes her as Ruth, someone he dated back in his academy days. And in his log, he states that the crew is seeing things that cannot possibly exist, yet they are undeniably real. And he talks to Ruth and asks how she can possibly be here. It's been 15 years, and she hasn't aged a day, which is kind of interesting because 15 years prior to this point, Kirk would have been about 18 or 19. And this actress is about 30. So when Kirk was about 19, he was dating a 30-year-old. Interesting. And then he gets a communication from Spock, and he tells Kirk that they have detected some strange readings coming from the planet. Some kind of power field is draining the energy from the ship, which, of course, is a problem. And McCoy is walking with Barrows. He flirts with her for a bit, which is probably a little odd, because he's almost twice her age, but as we know from Dax on Deep Space Nine, he had the hands of a surgeon. And she finds some kind of weird Renaissance fair costume, and she decides to put it on, which is fucking bizarre. I know her uniform is ripped, but it's not like it's falling off her or anything. Seems weird to suddenly decide to go around in this weird dress and dunce cap from a bygone era, but whatever. She likes it. And McCoy seems to appreciate it as well, so that's nice. And Sulu is walking alone somewhere, and he gets attacked by a fucking samurai who pops out of the ground. And he tries to stun him with his phaser, but it doesn't work. So he makes a break for it, and he runs into Kirk and tells him that there's a samurai after him, which is confusing. And then Spock beams down. He's barely able to get through because of the limited power on the ship. And then they hear a tiger. and Kirk says, "Spread out, let's find it." Is that what we need to be doing right now? Looking for a fucking tiger? I guess so. And elsewhere, McCoy and Barrows run into a black knight on a horse holding a lance.
"None shall pass."
What?
"None shall pass."
And McCoy says these things can't be real. So he just stands there, confident that he won't be hurt. The knight charges and spears McCoy through the chest. Kirk, Spock, and Sulu show up. They try to shoot the knight with phasers, but once again, their phasers don't work. So Kirk takes out Sulu's revolver and shoots the knight, and he falls. And they take a look at McCoy, and he's dead. Tragic. And Barrows is absolutely hysterical about the whole thing. She blames herself for some reason. And Kirk is about as nice to her as I think he can be, given the circumstances. He doesn't get mad at her, but he wants her to come to her senses. And he's probably wondering why the fuck she's wearing this goofy costume. Like, where's your uniform? But he doesn't bother asking about that because her change of clothing is maybe the least bizarre thing they've seen today. And the weirdness continues because they scan the body of the knight with a tricorder, and it appears to be made out of some kind of rubber material. It wasn't really alive to begin with, which is strange because Ruth and Finnegan don't seem to be made out of that material. It's also kind of odd that phasers don't work, the Enterprise is low on power, but the tricorders work just fine. Just a little weird. But whatever. They talk for a moment, and when they look back, both McCoy's body and the knight's are gone. And Spock asks Kirk what his thoughts were before he ran into some of the people he described. And Kirk says he was thinking about his days at the Academy. He was obviously thinking about Ruth and Finnegan. But then, does that mean that Sulu was just thinking about a fucking samurai? It's like the writer was thinking, oh, what would a Japanese man be thinking about? Oh, a samurai. Obviously, it's got to be a samurai. What else would he be thinking about? I don't think it's necessarily racist, but it's certainly stereotypical, I think. But moving on. So Finnegan shows up again. Kirk chases after him, and I say it's a chase, but it's really more of a light jog. And Kirk follows Finnegan to the same spot where he fought the Gorn. How wonderful. And he fights with Finnegan, and I think this could be the best fight scene in the original series. There's not a lot of patented double fist Kirk punches, and most of the fight is pretty believable. It's also engaging because it's a struggle for Kirk. And fair enough, his opponent is fighting pretty dirty, but Kirk is still getting beat by this cliche Irish bully. And Finnegan explains that he's still 20 years old, so he has the edge, which makes sense. Although I'd say, much like Ruth, he looks to be about 30. But whatever. Kirk briefly gets the upper hand, and Finnegan fakes an injury to his back. He says he can't feel his legs, even though his legs are clearly moving. And Kirk kind of pokes him, and Finnegan grabs him and flips him over. And you'll notice that Kirk's shirt is completely intact until it isn't. I mean, what the fuck happened here? His shirt was fine before the last cut. And then it jumps back to him, and it looks like he's been mauled by a fucking Mugatu. I mean, holy shit. Did a truck run him over when we weren't looking? Kirk has a reputation for ripping his shirt a lot. And it seems like he did this one on purpose. And for anyone who's been following my channel since the beginning, you might be aware that one of my earliest videos was about this scene, where Kirk randomly rips his shirt. So I'm kind of remaking it a little bit here, but it's because it's just as confusing now as it was then. But anyway, Kirk collects himself and the fight continues. This time, he's not showing any mercy, and he knocks Finnegan into the Phantom Zone. And then Spock shows up and asks Kirk if he enjoyed it. And Kirk says he did enjoy it, and he seems surprised that he enjoyed it. He says he always wanted to, quote, beat the tar out of Finnegan. And, you know, I gotta wonder about Finnegan. I know that this is Kirk's exaggerated interpretation of who this guy really is, but it's still hard to picture him in Starfleet. Did he graduate from Starfleet Academy? Did he eventually become an evil captain who puts cold soup in the beds of his crewmates? Who knows? Based on what we see, it's hard to picture him behaving in a Starfleet manner. And they conclude that they have to control their thoughts, because obviously the technology they detected is manifesting their thoughts. It's kind of like when Ray was thinking about the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man in Ghostbusters. So they head back to the rendezvous point, and they're attacked by a fighter plane and Sulu's samurai. I don't get that. Were they thinking about those things? Who knows? And what the hell happened to Alice and the rabbit? They're never seen again. Anyway, Barrows gets attacked by Don Juan again. She obviously has some strange fetishes. Barrows is not a well-written character. I know it's the 60s, but she seems to have a fantasy about being assaulted. And that's a little icky, if I'm being honest. But anyway, they chase him off, and Kirk orders everyone to stand at attention and focus on that. And then the caretaker of this place shows up, and he's a big-time weirdo. He says that these experiences were intended to amuse them. And Sulu says they seem awfully advanced to just be running an amusement park here. And Kirk says the more complex the mind, the greater the need for the simplicity of play, which is what I like to say when people give me shit about playing video games. And then McCoy shows up, alive and well, and he's got 2 space hookers with him. So we thought he was dead, but he's actually the only one that's been having a good time. And he says they took him below the surface for some repairs. So his death wasn't actually an illusion. He did die, which is kind of crazy. And Barrows somehow is jealous and annoyed that McCoy manifested these 2 women, as though she's dating McCoy now and has any right to tell him how he spends his shore leave, especially since she fantasizes about being attacked by a fictional 17th century libertine. I'm just saying, don't kink shame McCoy after what you just exposed about yourself. It also might be worth noting that her uniform is magically repaired. I mean, maybe Don Juan didn't actually attack her this time. Maybe he just showed up to sew up her outfit and then leave. I mean, that's the least he can do, right? And the weirdo caretaker says that he regrets that some of them were made uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Dude, some of us were made dead. Some of us are still dead. I didn't mention it, but Lieutenant Angela Martine was gunned down while fleeing from a fighter plane. And as you can see, she has not been resurrected like McCoy. Tragic. I mean, if she is alive, she's not here. And the caretaker goes on to say that if they use the proper caution, this would be an ideal place for Kirk's people to enjoy themselves. And then Kirk just calls the Enterprise and tells her to tell the crew to prepare for the best shore leave they've ever had. I guess Kirk didn't hear the part about proper caution, because he's just going to beam down his crew, and they're all going to be just as oblivious as he was when Finnegan was kicking his ass. But it's fine, because Kirk sees Ruth again, and he decides to stick around. And later, they all report back to the Enterprise. They're rested, recharged, everyone's been laid, and they're ready to take on their next challenge. The end. Although, I gotta wonder why this planet was draining the Enterprise's power. Like, if it was all just a misunderstanding and it's supposed to be a fun theme park, why was the Enterprise being damaged? They never bothered to explain that. But that's the episode. Overall, not the best episode of Star Trek by any means, but it is fun to watch. I do enjoy it. And when you think about it, it's basically just a malfunctioning holodeck episode before the holodeck even existed. And it was written by Theodore Sturgeon, who is a very prolific science fiction writer. He also wrote the episode of Mock Time, so his place in Star Trek history is well earned. And I really love the Finnegan character. I think he's wacky and fun, and he has a good fight scene with Kirk. And as I said, I gotta wonder how he's doing in Starfleet now. 15 years later. Is he still pulling this kind of shit? Who knows? And the episode is obviously not that deep, but it's still a good, solid episode, and I think the trouble with it is that the questions are more interesting than the answers. Although they do return to this planet in an episode of Star Trek the Animated Series, and they go into a little bit more detail about how this place works. Although it's been a long time since I've seen that one, I probably should have rewatched it for this video, but I did not. But anyway, I should probably wrap this up. Let me know what you think of this episode, and until next time, take it easy.